Hello, David, and thank you very much for accepting my invitation. I think in many places in Poland, you are well known, but for those people who may not know you, I want to briefly introduce you that David is a legendary captain who changed one of the worst crew on the US Navy from the last position into the best one. And he described this experience in his bestseller, Turn the Ship Around, and then followed by Leadership is Language. And both books were widely influential and really being source of inspirations for me, for results company in Poland, many companies around the world. I'm very excited today to talk about David's third book, Distancing, how great leaders reframe the conversation to make better decision. This book was written by David and Michal Gillespie, and what it means for leaders navigating in this complexity world of today. This book, by the way, will be soon published in Polish language by OSM Power and for Results. So, first question, David, what was the main motivation behind writing Distancing?
Yeah, well, on the submarine, we did a pretty good job at pushing the authority out to the people with the information to make decisions and getting them to think like leaders. But that's only really half the problem. The other half of the problem is you want them to make good decisions. And I think decision making improves just by the virtue of when you ask someone, hey, or when you set up a condition where say it's your decision, they will improve their decision making. But sometimes the decisions weren't very good, and the engineer would come to me with a plan, and it sounded like really good for the engineering department, but not so great for the entire submarine, for maybe operations or weapons or the whole rest of the submarine. And I would ask questions, and questions that seemed to help were questions like, "Hey, sit in my chair." And I would actually get out of my chair and I put them in the captain's chair, and I would go get a cup of coffee. Say, "Sit in my chair for a couple of minutes. When I come back, tell me what you would do if you were me." Or I want you to imagine that 6 months from now, and you're looking back to today. You get to talk to yourself, the 6 months in the future engineer, and the 6 months in the future you is going to tell you of today what you should do. What would that 6 months in the future you advise you to do today? And these seemed to really help. And it was surprising. I wasn't really sure why it helped, but I would come back and then they would say, well, then I would do this. And it was they hadn't had a chance to talk to anybody. They hadn't a chance to look at the data again. They hadn't had a chance to run more modeling. All they did was think about it in a slightly different way, and the decision making was better. So I teamed up with Michael Gillespie, who's a PhD in psychology, to say, help me understand, why does this work, and can we apply it in our own lives and more generally? And the answer is it works because it gets our own ego out of the way, and we view the situation without all the baggage of me being me. So, for example, if I made the decision last week that we should sell DVDs, then it's very hard for me this week to decide that selling DVDs was a bad idea, because in my brain is going to try and convince me that it was a good idea because it knows that I was the one who made the decision. But if I said, but we all have the experience. We can look at our friends and say, why are you doing that? You're messing up your life. But they can't see it themselves. Well, guess what? They have the same experience with you. And it's because you're you, you can't see, your brain literally distorts reality to convince you that everything you're doing is right, all the decisions you ever made were good, and and that's what gets in the way of our decision making.
That's a simple way to change the perspective, change the way of thinking. to the people. And in distancing, you challenge the very popular belief that leaders should always be here and now. Remember, many years I've been taught, you have to be here and now. So what made you start questioning this core assumption in leadership, modern leadership, and mindfulness thinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are times to be in the here and now, but there's also times to be distancing. So there's a famous story where the two leaders of Intel, the microprocessor
Yeah.
company, Gordon Moore and Andy Grove, and this is back in the 80s. And now Intel started as a a computer memory company, but people forgot that. But these Gordon Moore, after whom Moore's Law is named, and Andy Grove, who are celebrities in the tech world, started this company, and it was a very successful company in Silicon Valley. They became rich, they became famous, they grew a successful company making memory chips. And in the 80s, there were a couple economic factors that came into play. There were Asian manufacturers were coming in and pressurizing memory chips were basically becoming commodities. And they posted a loss for the very first time. And their clients were saying, "Hey, these Japanese and Korean memory chips are cheaper, and they're actually better quality than what you're making." Meantime, they had this little tiny processor, the 4004 microprocessor. It was a tiny part of the company, but they couldn't keep it in stock, and they were flip-flopping back and forth. They couldn't decide, and they couldn't. Why? Because their brains couldn't give up the fact that they were memory chip makers. And Andy Grove even says in his book, he says, "We were memory. We like not we." We ran a memory chip making company. We were memory chips. Like their identity was welded together with this concept of memory chips because they had just spent the last 15 years making hundreds of decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, building this company to make memory chips. And finally, one day, Grove says to Moore, I mean, after a year, flip flop, flip flop, flip flop, no decision, no decision, no decision, keep losing more money. And Grove says, "Hey, what if we got fired and they brought in new people to run the company?" And instantly, Gordon Moore responds, "Well, they'd get out of memory chips and they'd shift over to microprocessors." And again, there's no review of the data, no analysis of spreadsheets, no calling in consultants, none of that. It's just thinking about it from the perspective of what if we were somebody else? And he's like, well, of course they would shift over to microprocessors, and that's what they did. And of course, they became very successful with microprocessors. And we forgot now that they actually started with memory chips. And so it's not like be more into yourself to make the decision, but when you're trying to make a decision, especially if it's something like, well, should I take a job? Should I move? Should I start a company? How should I deal with this person who I feel has insulted me, or there's somebody in my family who I'm upset? These kind of decisions are almost always better made from a more distanced, more balanced, a more neutral perspective. Why? Because you see more clearly what's really going on. Because your brain filters things. There's another story in the book where we tell, so there's an airliner that's landing in San Francisco. This is Asiana 214. And they were having a couple problems. The electronic landing system in San Francisco was under maintenance, which is a very regular thing. This is on this particular day, 1,000 planes had landed safely. And it's a normal thing that they take these things down for maintenance. And in good weather, it's fine. Then there's a series of lights. And these lights were going, they had messed up the way the autopilot was controlling the engine speed. And so the engines were essentially on idle. And this big 777 was basically dropping. It was dropping through the glide path and going lower, lower, lower. And eventually it hit the seawall and 3 people were killed. But as the thing was dropping, the lights are turning from white to red. There's four lights. Like first one turns red, then second one turns red, third one turns red, and finally fourth one turns red, which means you're really, really low. And the pilot afterwards said he never saw the fourth light turn red. How was this possible? The other pilot saw the fourth light turn red, and of course you're coming closer, so the lights are getting brighter, and so they're more easy to see. So it doesn't make any sense, like physically or physiologically, why he couldn't see the fourth light turn red. The only thing that makes sense is his brain. It was so disturbing to know that they were so low. His brain just said, "Yeah, I'm going to just filter that out." And it's not like he saw it and rejected it. His brain chose not to even
Mm.
forward that to his conscious level. And again, if you want to make good decisions, especially in times of high stress or high risk, it's more important that you see the what's really going on. And you can do this by just simply jumping out of your body and say, like, well, what would someone else do? In this case, he was being evaluated. And so that also tends to put us just in this self-immersed state where it's like, oh, I'm more worried about, like, I'm worried about me. I'm worried about how I look. I'm worried about what people think of me. And this really has a bad impact on your decision making.
I can confirm that I am not good seeker. I'm looking for something and I don't see it. So always I go to my wife and she's a different brain, I think, because
Yeah,
she's immediately saying, "Look, it is on the table."
it's
When
right
I look
there.
second time, I said, "Yeah, it is," but I couldn't see it. And this is serious. Many times I experienced something like that, that my brain is just switched off. And I don't know
Yeah.
why. What's the
Yeah,
situation?
that is a perfect example because you say, well, I know it's not in my drawer because you're thinking I didn't put it in my drawer. Like you think you know,
Mm.
your brain thinks you know the, or maybe you glanced in there and you didn't see it. So in your brain, you're like, well, it's not in there. But your wife's not burdened by that. No,
Mm.
she's like, yeah, it's right here in your drawer.
Right. That's the quite often case. David, in high risk environment, we are operating well, sometimes in submarines, sometimes in aircraft cockpit, sometimes in executive boardroom. Speed matters. So, how do you convince leaders that distance doesn't slow down decision because you have to go be someone else somewhere else, but actually improves their quality?
It just takes a second, just like boom. You say, what if someone else was looking at this? Or what if you were talking to uh, be your 6 months in the future self, be your 10 year in the future self. Now look back at it. You're, you're, you actually spend less time solving the problem because as soon as you do that, it's like the shade, the goggles fall off. And then I say, oh, now I can see what's going on. And then it becomes very easy to make decisions. So, for example, the Gordon Moore case, or in the um, case of Asiana 214, it's more important to make the right decision
Mhm.
than make it really fast. But it also happens, you can happen more quickly this way because you're not flopping around and you don't feel the tug of your own brain saying, no, that can't be right. No, that can't be right. No, that can't be right. We have to stay with renting DVDs, or we have to stay whatever the old business model is that we're stuck in.
So it means that distancing doesn't need to be long process. It's just
No.
sometimes
Yeah,
seconds.
and we don't one thing we were worried about as we wrote the book is that people would sort of be in this la la land for long periods of time. Distancing is just something you do for a short period of time to look at the decision from a different perspective and then jump back. It's like you don't spend your whole life talking to your coach. You just
Mm.
you just you practice. Let's say you're playing tennis, you practice on your own or you play games, but then your coach, then you go get a coaching session. So these are like self-coaching sessions, but they're more effective because it's not you coaching you from the perspective of you. It's this other wiser person who sees more clearly. It sees what you look like from the outside. and it's unencumbered by your baggage. So your coach doesn't care that you just spent 6 hours perfecting holding the racket a certain way. If that's not, he's like, no, that's not how you want to actually hold it. And like that, your coach, but your brain is saying, there's no way I just spent 6 hours practicing holding the racket the wrong way.
Yeah. David, the balcony metaphor is very powerful. And thank you, by the way, for giving me space in your book to share this stepping onto the balcony exercise and looking from a different perspectives. But can you recall a moment in your leadership journey when stepping onto the balcony significantly changed the course of events or decision-making process?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Maciek, for the story. The story that Maciek contributed was they take their clients through an exercise, or your clients through an exercise where if you imagine you're on a dance floor, a lot of people tend to be a little bit self concerned about self-image. Like, well, how do I look? Do I look goofy? And so there's this self-immersion, worrying about image kind of mindset, and you don't have as much fun. And so you say, well, what if I'm up on the balcony looking down? How does that change my perspective? Well, there are a number of things happen that are really interesting. One is you're not you, you're someone else looking at this whole dance floor where there's all these people, like you're just one person out there. And sometimes if you imagine, what I like to do sometimes is imagine I'm not the quarterback of my life. So in American football, the quarterback is calling the plays, and you're wearing a helmet. And you're looking at the world through this sort of restricted view, and it feels very personal. You get hit hard, you get knocked down,
Mm.
and you're mad at that person for doing it, and then you walk off and you talk to the coach. The coach doesn't care. They don't care about getting even with what happened. They're just like, what are we going to do next? And they have this sort of broader perspective, and that's what this balcony does for you. I intend to on the submarine for about a year now, and so this was gonna and it was like this 3-day inspection where not only do the inspectors like look at things and look at records, but they have you do um, fight fires and casualties and on the submarine. So this is a big deal. And it's going to kind of be a report card of how this whole experiment was going to go. And I was standing in the control room the night before the inspection as the ship was driving in toward port to pick up the inspection team early the next morning. And normally this would be kind of a stressful time for me. I'd be like thinking about, well, what if it doesn't go well? And this is going to be a report card, not only on the ship, but on my leadership. Should there be this sort of it'd be an anxious moment. And I remember kind of instead of like being like on a submarine, I think it's really easy to kind of just like be into yourself because you're in this very
Mm.
closed space and you're standing in the closed room. And I kind of zoomed out and I didn't just picture like me and the control, like a picture, like I was above the ocean. I kind of pictured the submarine driving underwater. And it was um, very relaxing. And I just remember my heart rate, instead of being like dum bum bum, I was like hum bum bum. It's just like relaxed,
Mm.
and I felt calm and peaceful and serene, and I wasn't worried. And I kind of started thinking about, well, this is going to be kind of cool actually, because we're going to get to try out do these things that we don't normally get to do with the submarine, and we'll see what we learn, and we'll see how this thing went, and I'm sure we can find ways to make. And it kind of like my whole brain, instead of being sort of this, it kind of went relaxed, and
Mm.
and and it was, and it turned out we did amazingly well on that particular
Mm.
inspection. But in terms of being calm and relaxed and reducing anxiety, there's science. Michael Gillespie has a PhD in organizational psychology, and so he was doing, looking at the research behind these things. And there's research that shows that when you look at a situation, if you look at a situation, even if it happened to you, but if you say, hey, imagine, just tell the story as if this were happening to somebody else. Let's say a traumatic situation, and you tell it that way as opposed to, well, then this happened to me, and then I did this, and then this other thing happened to me. Telling it from the perspective of third person
Yeah.
actually calms people down
Yes.
and doesn't make it feel as
This was
anxious.
this was convincing. By reading the book, I had one experience which was a little bit dramatic situation. And when I use the third person, like Maciek, you have to take care of yourself, or mobilize
Yeah,
now. It helps me, to calm down my emotions,
yeah,
and so it's very simple, but I think it works.
yeah. Well, one of the studies was they took athletes and they had them endurance athletes, and during the event, they had one group say, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it, which is an immersed state language. And they had another group saying, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, which is the state that would be if, say, your coach or a supportive onlooker were encouraging you to do it, which is not an immersed state. And even though it was just yourself saying it to yourself, the people who were prompted to say you can do it as opposed to I can do
Yeah.
it went farther faster, and they reported less perceived exertion than the other group. And so there's evidence to show that I mean, we have fairy tales about this, like the emperor has no clothes, where it's the little
Yeah.
kid who's naive and he's not all
Yeah.
part, he's not
Yeah.
like he's an outsider, he's not part of the whole,
Yeah. Right. Right.
seduction of the crooks who are selling this invisible fabric. And he's the only one who's,
Yes. So
well, they all
Anderson,
see it, but he's the only one who can actually say anything.
the Anderson's fairy tale.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need such a key to tell the truth, because sometimes
Right.
immerse in ourselves, we can be much more nervous and not self-confident. So my question, the question is, how should the concept of distance change the way of meetings, conversation, or decision-making process are
Yeah.
led in our organizations?
So a perfect example is a team that's doing a retrospective or or a
Mm,
review on how they've done. And these things tend to be an opportunity for people to get defensive and explain over and over again why they did what they did, which often is simply explaining why I was I was so messed up. And nobody cares. And so if you're setting up for something like that, you can say things like, "Hey, I want you to imagine, like, how, let's say another team's going to do this 6 months from now. What would we want them to learn
mm,
from us?" So now I'm not really talking about me. I'm talking about helping this other team. And now it's 6 months from now. So there's this element of forward looking and jumping up into the future, and it tends to reduce our defensive ego barriers, so we can speak more freely about, well, instead of doing it this way, the way I did it, I learned after 3 tries that this other way is really a better way to write the code, and so blah blah blah. And it tends to mitigate the ego involvement. So questions like that help. Another way to do it is I got a chance to interview the head of the Swiss Armed Forces, and they're doing a reorganization. And the problem with any reorganization in every company is that, like, let's say we did a reorganization in the United States Navy. In the Navy, there are 4 tribes. There's the pilots, the surface ship drivers, the submariners, and the Marine Corps. Marine Corps is part of the Navy, so it's a little army inside of a Navy. And so, if you're a submariner and you're doing a reorg, you without even thinking about it, you think of yourself as a submariner after the reorg. And
mm.
so, your motivation is to make sure that submarines continue to get a lot of money, and submariners get key positions and that kind of, and so you fight from that perspective of protecting being a submariner. But what they said, they told their people, say, hey, look, no matter what part of the Swiss Armed Forces you're in, I want you to imagine that there's going to be this reshuffling, and if you may be in the Air Force now, but you might be in the Army afterwards. So, and what that does is say, well, you know what, I don't really have a dedication to making the Air Force, be the premier service. So I can just think like, honestly, what really is the best way to go?
Yeah. So coming back to coming to the end to our conversation, I have last questions. If a leader were to choose one practice from distancing and applying consistently, for example, for 30 days, which one, in your opinion, would create the biggest shift?
I really like be your future self. There's three dimensions where you can
Yeah.
distance. Remember, we're distancing
Yeah.
from ourselves. We're not distancing from reality or something. So we're distancing from ourselves. And there's three dimensions. We could be someone else. This is the way Warren Grove said, hey, if we got fired and someone else ran the company, what would they do? We can be somewhere else. So this is like on the balcony. Hey, I imagine myself out here looking back at me. And then number three is be some time else. And this is I jump into the future and then I advise myself from the future. One of the reasons I like it is I think mentally it's not that hard to do. And you can jump, like if you're in traffic and you get cut off and someone is bad driver, you tend to like that's a perfect moment. You feel sort of this, oh, I was insulted or whatever the situation. And all you need to do there is just jump forward an hour or a day. Like tomorrow, say, is this going to matter tomorrow? No. So you could do it an hour or a day. You can do it 6 months at work. For a lot of work things, I use 6 months because it's long enough to get away from, okay, I can't just solve the immediate problem we have. We need to really figure out what's going on here and solve it at the root problem. If we're shipping windows and the windows keep showing up at the clients and they have dings and bangs in the frames and we have to like like why don't we, maybe the box we're shipping them in or the way they're being shipped is not, so like let's fix the root problem so we don't have to fix it over and over again. And then for big decisions like, and Jeff Bezos did this when he was contemplating starting Amazon. He said, well, when I'm 80 or 10 years from now, like when I'm 80 and I look back on my life, am I going to regret how this particular decision? And it turns out when we get to the end of our lives, the things we most regret are not the things we did, it's the things we didn't do. And so by jumping to the end and imagining I'm at the end of my life, it makes it more clear to me what I should do. And it removes, I just recently moved to Europe because as a speaker and an author, I can live anywhere. And we've been talking about doing it, but we didn't do it for a couple of years. And there really was no reason why. It was just kind of like I had made the decision, well, together with my wife that we were going to live in Florida. And so that just became like forever and it didn't need to be. And so now we have a more interesting life and we're learning new languages and seeing new sights and running on new trails and all kinds of new stuff, meeting new friends that we wouldn't have had. And when you get to this point, you're like, well, why didn't we do it sooner?
I strongly believe, David, the decisions to move to Europe from the perspective when you'll be older will be well evaluated. It will be very good. It was a very good decision. So
Yeah.
I wish you best time in Europe and everywhere else you want to go with your wife. So thank you so much for this insightful conversation. I believe that this book is essential for a leader who wants to move from control into empowerment. And for those who would like to explore these topics further, I warmly invite you to the Accountability Congress organized by Four Results, which will take place in March 19 in Warsaw, obviously this year. David will be one of the speakers, and I believe this topic will be explored in much greater depth there. So once again, David, thank you very much, and I look forward to see you at the Congress.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing everyone there.